Hello, hello. Hi, gang. Pro football season opener right around the corner. In fact, I think it's Thursday in Kansas City. That's what, yeah, it's a repeat of the AFC Championship. Baltimore visiting Kansas City. The only sportsbook app that I ever recommend, BetParks, the BetParks sportsbook app. It's got a great offer for new customers to kick off the new season. 50 to 1 odds boost on your pick to win the Pro Football Championship, the big game that I'm not allowed to say the name of. New users, sign up, make a deposit, get 50 to 1 super odds boost, 50 to 1, pick your team and get the odds boosted. So the top 6 favorites to win the Pro Football Championship: Kansas City, San Fran, Baltimore, Detroit, Cincinnati, and Philadelphia. Download the BetParks Sportsbook and online casino app right now and get your 50 to 1 super odds boost on your pick for this year's Pro Football Championship. Limited time offer for new customers only. BetParks.com, they've got terms and conditions. You've got to be 21 and in PA, NJ, Michigan, or Maryland. You play for fun. You love to win. You bet. BetParks. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. So I was just on the website of the DNC. Democrats.org. And there is this page at the DNC website, who we serve. And then there's a quote from the Democratic Party platform, and it says, Democrats are the party of inclusion. We know that diversity is not our problem, it is the promise. As Democrats, we respect differences of perspective and belief and pledge to work together to move this country forward even when we disagree. We do not merely seek common ground, we strive to reach higher ground. And then on the website of the DNC, there is a list of who we serve. I am going to read the groups that they serve, and you are going to tell me who's missing. Here we go. Who do the Democrats profess to serve? African Americans, Americans with disabilities, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, Democrats abroad, ethnic Americans, Latinos, the faith community, the LGBTQ plus community, Native Americans, rural Americans, seniors and retirees, small business community, union members and families, veterans and military families, women, young people, and students. Who's not on that list? Men, young men in particular. And the issue that I want to get into today briefly with you, and then I'll do it on CNN, is do we need a targeted approach, a policy approach to help our struggling young men? So much is being written about this recently, and now masculinity, you're wondering why I had that thumbnail with Scott Galloway and I with our shirts off. Yes, that's the way we both appear. It's because the data paints a picture of young men, 18 to 30-ish, struggling. They are behind young women in terms of education. They are leading unhealthy lives in comparison to women. They are struggling. But nobody, it seems, wants to have the conversation about what we can do to help them. And the reason Scott Galloway is going to be on my CNN program today is that he's got the willingness, I'll say the courage, to address this issue politically, and has done so in the past. And in the last couple of days, and I've had these stories at Smerconish.com, there have been 3 in-depth, amazing pieces that I recommend you read. One of them was from Claire Kane Miller in the New York Times, and she frames the issue under the headline, "Many Gen Z men feel left behind. Some see Trump as the answer." Listen to this. In some ways, this presidential election has become a referendum on gender roles. And the generation with the biggest difference in opinion between male and female voters, Gen Z. On one side are young women who as a group are very liberal and been politically galvanized by gender bombshells like #MeToo, the overturning of Roe versus Wade, and the candidacy of Vice President Kamala Harris. On the other side are young men, some of whom feel that rapidly changing gender roles have left them behind socially and economically, and they see former President Trump as a champion of traditional manhood. The gap among, and they've got a chart that shows this, the gap between young men and young women in terms of how they look at the presidential candidates, 51 points. 51 points. When President Biden was still in the race, men ages 18 to 29 favored Mr. Trump by an average of 11 percentage points, while young women favored Biden by 28. That was a 39-point gender gap, far exceeding that of any older generation. In a New Times Siena poll of 6 swing states this month, young men favored Trump by 13, young women favored Harris by 38, a 51-point gap. Now, before you start thinking, oh, it's all these young guys who are misogynistic, screw them. No, the story goes on to talk about the interviews that the author did with these disaffected young men who are floundering. Majorities of them support abortion rights and same-sex marriage. Even young men voting Republican are not necessarily socially conservative. There is... in interviews with young men planning to vote for Mr. Trump, they described feeling unvalued. They said it had become harder to be a man. They valued strength in a president, yet they didn't express bitter misogyny or praise the exaggerated displays of brawn embraced by the Trump campaign. I know the perception is that, well, if they're gravitating toward Trump, that must be who they are, but that's not the case. That is not the case. That was one of the pieces that I wanted to recommend. That's the Times. Then there's NPR. Really, really great discussion here with Richard Reeves, who's been a guest of mine, really smart guy, well-spoken. He's been a guest of mine on CNN and a guest of mine on POTUS as well. We did a book club podcast release, his book, Of Boys and Men. He is an expert on the challenges facing boys and men. And he says that Melinda French Gates recently distributed $1 billion supporting women and girls. And Reeves, who has a not-for-profit institute that addresses the plight of young men, was a beneficiary of some of that money. Now, why would Melinda Gates distributing money for the purpose of helping young women give some to Richard Reeves? Quote, what she's come to realize is that in a world of floundering men is not likely to be a world of flourishing women. A world of floundering men is not likely to be a world of flourishing women, and that we do have to rise together, which I think makes a lot of sense. And then the biggest piece that I wanted to show you, and this is in the newsletter today. It's posted as my lead item at Smerconish.com and in today's newsletter. Donald Trump courts the Maniverse. Have you ever heard of the Nelk Boys? I assume you know the Paul brothers, and you know Dave Portnoy. My point is, there's a whole sort of cottage industry out there of so-called influencers who are getting the attention of the young men that Trump is now reaching. And this story, which was written by John Branch, tells many of the same stories that we heard in the pieces that I've already referenced. Let me just see if there's something here I can quote for you. Yeah, I love this. To find the young men that I'm addressing, Trump and his allies have been exploring deep into the universe, a maniverse of social media stars with male-centric audiences, the Nelk Boys, Dana White and UFC, Dave Portnoy and his Barstool Sports Network, YouTubers like Jake and Logan Paul, podcasters like Theo Vaughn, streamers like Aiden Ross. These figures have become a generation's Hannity, Carlson, and Limbaugh, but without the obvious political shroud. And it goes on to talk again about the trouble that young men are having in comparison to young women, and how this fight for how to define masculinity is a very real issue in the campaign. In fact, it may in part explain, now that I've read the data and heard some of the analysis, it may explain further why Kamala Harris selected Tim Walz, the former football coach, Midwestern, regular-looking guy, as her running mate. A different approach to masculinity. When I looked, and I'm going to get into this with Scott Galloway, when I looked at the comments appended to the last of those stories, I was really surprised by how negative they were, how nasty they were. Essentially saying, hey, screw these guys, they're a bunch of incels, they're misogynistic, they're moaners, get out and get a job, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. People just willing to write off young men, like the DNC, which says, here's who we represent, here's who we serve. And never would you see men on that list, particularly young men. So this is a long-winded way of me trying to explain to you today's poll question at Smerconish.com, worded as follows: are policy solutions necessary to address the plight of young men who are underperforming in schools and leading unhealthier lives than young women? Is it time for a targeted approach? Making a note to myself here. Is it time for a targeted approach to young men? I mean, look, they feel it's the same point that I've made before in terms of the forgotten who gravitate toward Donald Trump of all age groups. And I have said to many of you who've called my program and said, oh, you look forward to the days when Trump is not on the political landscape. And I've said, but the grievances of the people who vote for Donald Trump are still with us, and they need to be addressed. And I'm pretty much saying the same thing here. Like, put out of your mind to whom they're gravitating politically, and instead say, we've got a group among us in society, and they're not doing well. Do we need to have a targeted approach to them? That's the poll question today. A little highbrow, right? And it requires some analysis and some thought and some data. I hope people go for it. And, obviously I didn't go with the very pedestrian who's going to win the race and how did Harris do in the big interview and so on and so forth. But I think the payoff is worth it. I love this issue. And I'm looking forward to talking about it on radio next week as well. So I'm doing that. Something else on CNN today. Christy Shamblin is the mother-in-law of one of the 13 heroes that we lost 3 years ago during the Afghanistan withdrawal. She was at Arlington Monday with former President Trump. So I'm going to get on television today the perspective of one of the family members who invited Trump to be there. And then Greg Lukianoff from the FIRE organization will join me to talk about social media and whether there's a higher duty by the likes of Zuckerberg or Elon Musk to be policing misinformation or maintaining neutrality. That'll be a great conversation. And gang, very important, particularly for those who are watching me live. Well, frankly, for all of you who watch my YouTube videos, thank you for that. Game on. Wednesday night, 8 p.m., if you join me, will have the first opportunity to buy the editorial cartoon book. I assume you all know what I'm talking about by now. 4 award-winning editorial cartoonists draw exclusively for the Smerconish.com daily newsletter, 4 days a week. And they've been doing so for the last year, and collectively, their editorial cartoons tell the story of this insane election. So it occurred to me, we should put out a book. We should print a book with all the editorial cartoons that tell the story of the election assembled in chronological order. And we're doing it. And there will be a limited supply of these books. So everything has come together. A lot of work has gone into this in the last few weeks, but everything is now staged so that Wednesday night at 8 p.m., those who join me live will have the first opportunity to buy a book. And the books will come out, they'll be printed right when the election ends. Please, please have an election victor on November 5th. If this thing goes on thereafter, it's going to screw up our printing schedule. But the plan is that the election ends, the final cartoons are drawn, and the book will get shipped in time for Christmas and will be a hell of a Christmas present. 5 pounds and like 300 pages. It's a coffee table book. It's got some heft to it. And if you join me Wednesday at 8, you'll see the jacket. You'll see the front cover and have the first opportunity to buy a book. So I'm really psyched about that. They're $50. They're $50, which for this coffee table book is underpriced. And on top of that, because it weighs 5 pounds and it's got to be boxed and shipped, there's additional cost. But we've held the line on the cost of the book. So join me Wednesday night in the newsletter. Wednesday will be the URL that you'll click, and join me on Wednesday at 8 p.m. I'm really excited about it. All right, look, you now have the advance word on today's poll question, and you also got the briefing. So go vote. Are policy solutions necessary to address the plight of young men who are now underperforming in schools and leading unhealthier lives than young women? Go vote. Have a great weekend. See ya.